at a different level in non-political things, in social things, in cultural things. And I think it's only when we stop, like I believe there is a spiritual crisis at some level, even within the Muslim community that is practicing, that's here today, all of us here in the masjid, and that we like to enjoy the gifts of America, but sometimes we're really lazy when it comes to giving back. And you know, for your neighbor or for our neighbors to see us as, you know, an asset to this country, or to you know, when such events would happen and they would just write it off without a second thought, they need to engage with us. They need to have conversations with us. So I believe grassroots campaigns, things like having, my husband mentioned this idea he thought it would be nice to do with youth, is like making a bunch of t-shirts that say, I'm Muslim and I'm not a terrorist, let's talk. And just bringing them to like a mall or a public space with tables and some information, and letting them just get to know other Americans, because, you know, as studies show, it takes, you know, the bad impression of Islam that people would have is decreased a lot just when they know one Muslim. If they don't know us, that's our fault. That really is our fault. If non-Muslims don't know us, if our neighbors don't know us, if our communities don't know us, that's our fault. And we have to think, even as a masjid or as Muslim institutions, if all of these institutions were gone tomorrow, would anyone from the community complain? You know, from the non-Muslim community, would anyone say that, you know, we miss that institution? That institution was valuable to our society. And thinking about whatever masjid it is that you attend or institution that you attend, how does it engage everyone else? You know, and a final thought is that a lot of times we're talking about political engagement and power. But subhanAllah, the example that you see in the Prophet Muhammad is that the focus, even though they achieved power, the focus was always service.
That was very good.
And where are we when it comes to service? And where are we in encouraging
No, she made a good point here, but she's lost her audience.
So I know my time is up. I have a lot to say about the online ideological battle, but we don't have time for it, so we'll end with this.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and truly, I think that's such an important takeaway, that we really need to be critical thinkers, and we need to teach our children to be critical thinkers, just as they wouldn't buy, just as we teach them not to, you know, really fall into any scam that they see on the internet. It's the same thing with people posing as knowledgeable people, whether it be in politics or in religion, and really falling into some of those traps. I welcome those of you who have questions. We really want to engage in discussion and really an interactive question and answer session. So we do have volunteers that are walking around and giving note cards and pens. So we have our volunteers also walk around and pick up some of these questions. We're going to be taking them as they come in. And we do suggest that you do write them down, because that helps us to be a little bit more efficient.
Wow.
So we shall begin that question and answer. We have our first one, and this question is for Salama Mariati. The question is, what role is the U.S. government playing, or should play, in supporting American Muslims to counter the ISIS narrative? And it was just so yes.
Very, very direct question. That's a tough one. Well, let's start with the obvious. What's on everybody's minds when it comes to the U.S. government and mosques? That's surveillance, sting operations. And they had out the national executive, Hussam Mosque. And I were involved in a documentary. And unfortunately, I didn't think it got well played enough. It's called The Newburgh Sting, where they went into a poor African American community and lured these guys who were petty criminals. You know, they were involved in some criminal activity, but they offered them like $250,000, and one guy needed to buy an organ for his brother for a transplant so he could live, so he thought he could be involved. None of them wanted to be involved in hurting anybody, but because they were lured into that, they were entrapped. They got convicted for terrorism. And I don't even think, you know, some of them were not even Muslim, but they met Muslims, you know, sometime in their life or in their interactions. But that is a negative interaction of the government. If we want to push surveillance out of the mosque, we have to create our own programs. You can't just talk about it and say this is bad. You can't just say law enforcement is bad, the media is bad, and the Jews and Christians are bad, and the foreign policy is bad, everything is bad. Then people will look at us like, well, you know, who are you? Like, are you a know-it-all? Are you this illusion that you're the only one who's right, everybody is wrong? When you think that you're the only one who's right and everybody's wrong, there's something wrong. And it's usually not them, it's with us. We have to think a little more critically. So what we have, and I'm not making this a commercial, we have what's called the Safe Spaces Initiative. And it needs to be discussed. What we're saying is create the safe space to preserve the sanctuary of the mosque so it is free of surveillance and free of anyone that is trying to lure our kids in the mosque or online into this violent extremist ideology. And we have crisis intervention. And the crisis intervention team, as Muslim was referring to, one of them is a mental health counselor. So that if a person is troubled, like Cameron Sarnaya in Boston, what did he do? He started shouting at the imam, saying, you know, you shouldn't be talking about Martin Luther King in a mosque. He's not a Muslim. And he did it twice, I think. So we kicked him out. And it's understandable. We don't want trouble. But then he did what he did, and he still came back to us. So, number one, if we find somebody troubled, I think it is out of our compassion as Muslims, our Islamic obligation, to first try to help that person, to rehabilitate that person. If we don't rehabilitate, they will incarcerate. And that is what a crisis intervention team is supposed to do. Then, if we find, yeah, you know what, this guy is involved in some bad stuff. And when I mean bad stuff, I don't mean good things. I mean really nasty things. It's not, you know, this is not within our, it's not something that we're professionals at. We need to say, somebody from law enforcement, that, okay, you need to investigate this situation, because we're not criminal investigators. Now, this is very tricky, of course, because when does the mosque say we will then allow law enforcement to look into this, and when we, you know, keep them at bay? It is all dependent on the relationships that we build, the trust that we build in the community, and the judgment that we offer our leaders to say, this is how the situation should be handled. But it requires careful planning and implementation and intervention and looking at these situations very, very delicately, very, very delicately. And that is when we will have a healthy partnership with the U.S. government. We want Muslims to be treated as partners, not as suspects. That's the goal. That should be the relationship between us and the U.S. government. And the fact is, they don't know how to speak about ISIS. They're not going to go and say, this is what Islam stands for. And when they do, honestly, I think they're making a big mistake. It is we Muslim leaders, the community leaders, that are here to offer the counter to that violent extremist narrative. We're the ones that have that authenticity and legitimacy, especially with our own community members and with our youth. And so it is again our responsibility as Muslims to stand up and speak, and then create that positive partnership relationship with law enforcement and the U.S. government.
Thank you, Brother Salam. Would anybody else on the panel like to answer that question? Hopefully we should have to.
What is it? Yeah, that one. I mean, there's a challenge when we trust law enforcement agency with the affairs of our mosques in terms of religious ideology, because no other religion does that, no other religious community does that. And I'm not specifically commenting on Salam's comments, but on the issue of countering violent extremism. There's a threat there's a danger when we accept this terminology within our own community, because no other community has to deal with that. You don't hear about countering violent extremism to deal with the thousands of Jewish American kids who joined the Israeli army killing people of Gaza. When was the last time the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, or the FBI approached the Jewish community to ask them to deal with this trend? Actually, there are many more Jewish Americans who have joined the Israeli army than there are Muslim Americans who have joined ISIS. So let's talk about the Jewish American kids who joined the Jewish state before we talk about, or as we talk about the Muslim Americans who joined the Islamic State. Neither one represents Judaism or Islam. How many counter-violent extremism programs exist in churches to deal with a lot of these Christian white supremacist groups that exist by the thousands with membership in the hundreds of thousands in America? They don't. The problem is when we accept that we are going to be singled out as some kind of a unique community, we reinforce a negative perception that exists about our community. The reality is, using government numbers now, I'm not using my numbers, there's about a dozen, maybe 20 American Muslims who have joined ISIS. As bad as it is, and for me, even one joining is stupid enough and bad enough. But it does not require a national program, especially not the government spending millions of dollars on scrutinizing the American Muslim community. What we need to do is obviously address the problem of ISIS, because ISIS is a problem. ISIS is not an imagination of our mind. ISIS is not a conspiracy, as Sheikh Muslim said. It is not. It might be exploited by these people. They exist. You go to Syria, you see them. You go to Iraq, they exist. But we have the tools to address ISIS. We have our scholars, may Allah bless them and give them long life, Sheikh Muzammil and others, with the knowledge around the country. Sheikh Suhail, Sheikh Jamal, Sheikh Muslima, mashallah, we just in our area, Sheikh Muhammad Faqih, Sheikh Yasir, in our area, we have enough to counter their sick ideology. We have enough programs between MPAC and CARE and the Masjid and the MSAs and MAS to keep our youth engaged. Now, when we have people who have mental illnesses, mental health problems, they need to be addressed. We should have. And I agree, our masajid, it was mentioned by Salam, it was mentioned by Sheikh Muslima, our masajid are in need to look into this issue without dealing with it as a taboo. The problem is, we do have a problem within the Muslim community that we are ashamed to address mental sicknesses, mental illnesses. We think this is something shameful in a community. It's real, it exists. Like you get a cold, some people get a cold, somebody has a depression, somebody has anxiety. It's normal things that happens in everybody and we have to address it. When we notice someone drifting away, it is our job to find a way to protect them. And again, if somebody is engaged in anything illegal, anything that you know is illegal, then obviously we have to stop them from doing it, or if it causes harm, to report them. There's no debate about that. My issue is not about that. Obviously, my issue is to be careful, especially the biggest buzzword now in government is CVE, which is countering violent extremism. And this is specifically a program for Muslims. This is not about any other community. And we have to be careful not to allow those few in our government who wish to exploit the system to get more funding for their agencies and their departments, to use our community as guinea pigs, our youth as targets for their programs, because it will create mistrust in our masajid. If our youth don't feel comfortable enough to talk about their views, if our imams are afraid to criticize U.S. foreign policy because they're afraid someone is going to report them as an ISIS sympathizer, we lose our freedom, we lose the activism of our religion and its ability to bring goodness to society at large.
So definitely we can see here that creating this balance of not falling into stereotyping ourselves and allowing others to stereotype ourselves that we're the only community that has an issue with extremism, but at the same time maintaining, which many of our masajid, including I saw, as wonderful, and a lot of mosques all around the United States have wonderful relationships that have been established with the local law enforcement. So this is a good thing. Our next question was actually directed towards Brother Hassan. How are you able to keep your calm when speaking to Bill O'Reilly, and how do you think us Muslims should respond to Islamophobic comments directed towards us, whether it's on social media or in person? And I'm sure after you answer, I'm sure some of us would like to
repeat the second part?
Yes.
The first part I got it.
So, okay. And how do you think that Muslims in general should respond to Islamophobic comments, whether it's on social media or in person? So,
well, I think keeping the calm, in addition to making dua, I had a good dose of NyQuil before going in. So I was sick and I was coughing. I needed something to suppress the cough. I guess it suppressed my emotions. My blood was boiling. I wanted to say a lot of things, but I was like, no, suppress it. Because it's no use to engage in the same level of anger. It's important to make our point clear, and hopefully those who are fair-minded will hear the point and notice that Bill O'Reilly was trying to silence his guest. It was myself and Brother Harith Darren from MPAC's national office. And I think both of us were, alhamdulillah, able to make our points clear to those who are fair-minded. In terms of how to deal with Islamophobia, is differentiate between two sources of Islamophobia. There's the ill-intended industry. There's an industry, deliberate industry, to defame Islam and Muslims. It's an industry with $30 to $40 million budget every year. About 34 organizations. They do publish books. They have speakers who go around on TV. That's intentional. Their intention is to actually defame Islam and create fear of Islam. Whenever there's a masjid being built, check Fear Inc. It's a report that was produced. Fear Incorporated, Fear Inc. Produced, and there was also a CARE report called Legislating Fear. You can download them. They're both available for free, and it details that industry, who is behind it, why they're doing it, what's their budget, and so on, what's their frames, what's the messages that they bring. What is important to differentiate between that group, because these people need to be exposed, they need to be challenged, they need to be defeated, they need to be countered at every level, The other Islamophobia is coming from people who are doing it out of ignorance. And that is people who are as much victimized with it as we are. The victims of Islamophobia are two. The targets of Islamophobia, us, Muslims, to marginalize us, to make us look like danger, threat to people. But the other target of it is, the bigger target is the American public. Their goal is to create separation, division between us and fellow Americans. These people are not our enemies. These people are not adversaries. These people are your neighbor, your co-worker, your friend, maybe your relative too. These people need to be talked to. You need to show them Islam in your lifestyle, in your attitude, in your character. Talk to them. Be forgiving. Just because they call you a terrorist, just because they ask you, Allah, you have no idea how many times I get asked, are you a supporter, a sympathizer of ISIS? Do you support ISIS? Oh, do you support what happened in Paris? Don't get upset, because they're asking genuine questions in their mind. They want to know. They want to feel comfortable. Is this masjid an ISIS masjid? Believe me, I get asked these questions when I say, I'm giving a khutbah there. Is this an ISIS masjid or not? So there's no ISIS masjid. But the problem is people are fooled, and we need to spend the time and invest. And I think once we know who we're dealing with, and most people are from the second category, it takes patience, it takes rahmah, it takes, the example of the Prophet how he was treated. Remember his story in Taif, right? People threw rocks at him, called him crazy, they sent the kids to throw stones at him, kicked him out of the city. What did he do? He was sitting crying for them. When Allah sent the angel for him to tell him, I'm here to utter orders now. You give me the order, I close the two mountains on them. The Prophet said, no, that's not what I was sent for. Maybe Allah will send people among them who will worship Allah, recognize Allah. He made dua for them. So we have to follow that example. The example of when he entered Mecca, after being forced out of Mecca, being tortured by the people of Mecca. Some of his best friends were killed by the people of Mecca. And when he entered back to his town, after victoriously, what did he say? You're all forgiven. You are all free. He could have punished, and it would have been just to punish, by the way. By international law. He would have been justified in punishing some of those who committed crimes and torture and murder. But he said, you're all forgiven. You did it out of ignorance. And he gained the hearts and the minds of people. We want to operate, inshallah, that way.
One thing is, I found that there are some people, they would like to understand, so of course we have to go out of our way to make them understand who we are, what our message is, what Islam stands for. But there are some people who want to make you angry, and they want to excite you, and they want to see, get something so that you can reaction, you say something. At that time, keep quiet. Don't answer them. With a khadamu jahiluna qalu salam. Allah said that when the ignorant address you,